becomes such a such a seminal play. Almost it becomes a definitive play because it dared to break so many boundaries. So the first boundary that is broken, for the first time, you have a playwright who does not play by the rules. So the rules for drama had already been set. You had Aristotle and his delineation of what tragedy is supposed to be, mostly till T.S. Eliot. We have had a hearkening back to Aristotle's ideas of tragedy or theory of tragedy, and a hearkening back to the Greek model. So that there is this classicist Greek model that has more or less been followed. And we all know what this Greek model pretty much was, that you have to have a hero who's above everyone, has to be a hubris, there has to be a tragic flaw, there has to be a fall, and then there's catharsis, and so on. So Aristotle's Poetics, where he delineates what theatre should look like, has been followed. So all the plays that we have followed, that we have done till now, the entire gamut of British writing, right from the 16th century to T.S. Eliot, 20th century, has been more or less following or hearkening back to the classicist mode, as we call it, the Greek classicist mode. Now, Osborne breaks that mode completely. So the hero in Osborne's play is not higher than anybody. He's a working class person. His tragedy also is that of a working class person. So there is no great fall. There is no, tragic flaw per se, and there is no catharsis. There is none of these pointers that Aristotle has said will make for good tragedy. All of that is missing here, and missing here quite deliberately. So this is, for the first time, a kind of a rebellion against the classical mode of writing. This rebellion also happens because till now, the playwrights were more or less belonging to, they were more or less upper class people, they were more or less people from the landed gentry. And even if they were not upper class, even if, say, Shakespeare, we don't know his, whereabouts per se. But then the fact remains that Shakespeare stuck to the classical mode, and that is the kind of theatre, and he wrote for the kings and queens. So another shift that is happening here. Who are you writing for? So the target audience also becomes different. Now, right from Shakespeare to, say, till Eliot, there was this perception that theatre going, Shakespeare catered to all kinds of people, yes, but his patrons were the royalty. So he had to cater to playwriting in such a manner that the royalty would be pleased with him. And subsequently, the people that we saw, there was a certain kind of audience that they were catering to. In fact, the fact that James Synge wrote for a certain kind of cerebral audience, but the audience that he got was not cerebral, that created a lot of problem. So there was always this kind of thing that if you are a theatre goer, you are, okay, you might come from wherever, but the patrons for the theatre were always the royalty or landed gentry. So there was an effort on the part of the playwright to please these people. Now here with Osborne, we have broken out of it completely because Osborne belongs to the working class himself. And he struggled through his life to get some kind of a recognition. And once he gets this kind of recognition, there seems to be this perpetual anger that is bursting forth from Osborne at every given point of time. So in India, we are used to an angry young man, now terribly old and spineless, Mr. Bachchan. But I think the original concept of the angry young man pretty much came from Look Back in Anger. So the whole concept of anger, the whole concept of rebellion, the whole concept of a certain dissonance with the society, that starts with John Osborne in terms of British theatre. And of course, several artists by then had started writing like this, but in terms of, since we are talking about the British theatre, it was pretty much this gentleman, Osborne, and his anger, that anger against the system, which starts off this whole narrative of the angry young man, which we copied the term and used it for our hero many years later. Is it clear till here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So his dates, December 1929 to 1994, so reasonably contemporary, lived through most of the 20th century, was an English playwright, screenwriter and actor, known for his prose and intense critical stance towards established social and political norms. So this is what I was talking to you about. So his anger was against the societal norms, his anger was against the political norms. So in a productive life of more than 40 years, Osborne explored many themes and genres, writing for stage, film and TV. His personal life was extravagant and iconoclastic. He was notorious for the ornate violence of his language, not only on behalf of the political causes he supported, but also against his own family, including his wives and his children. So you also have Osborne's, how do I say it, also the language. There is, it's in very basic, it's not in, and coming after Eliot who was writing a verse drama, so beauty of language. Now here the language is stark, it is angry, it is an everyday workman's language that he is using. So that is also another change that we see. He was one of the first writers to address Britain's purpose in the post-imperial age, and he helped make contempt an acceptable on-stage emotion. So for the first time, you have a great deal of contempt being displayed on stage. Earlier, there was, like I said, the stage was somewhat sacrosanct, and we did not have an everyday man story. The best that Shakespeare had done, but of course 4 centuries back, you had the workmen being depicted. But remember the workmen, they were more there to create humor than, and they were supposed to be stupid, and they were supposed to be funny, and they were supposed to be silly in Midsummer Night's Dream. Here you have it all stark. This is what a workman looks like. This is what his day looks like. This is the kind of money that he earns. This is the problem that he faces. He gets into a drinking brawl. So for the first time, we are talking about this kind of a regular person in a job who, the problems that the person faces. So he was born he was the son of Thomas Godfrey Osborne, who was a commercial artist, and Nellie Beatrice Grove, who was a Cockney barmaid. So also his parentage was somewhat different from the kind of parentage that we have seen earlier. So the mother was a barmaid and the father was a commercial artist. Needless to say, they were not great earners. And obviously, he pretty much grew up on the street. Thomas Osborne died in 1941, leaving the young boy an insurance settlement, which he used to finance a private education at Belmont College, a minor public school that closed in the 60s. And he entered the school in 1943, but was expelled in the summer term of 1945. So he could not last in school. He was chucked out of school. He claimed that he hit the headmaster, who had struck him for listening to a broadcast by Frank Sinatra. Now, you all know that Frank Sinatra was an absolute craze in the 70s. and the teacher the headmaster had stopped him from listening to Frank Sinatra's music when this young boy had turned around and hit the the headmaster, and had gotten chucked out of the school. So, and any of you who's into music will have a sense that the popular singers coming from America at that point of time were rebel singers. They were all talking about rebellion. So 1970s, that whole period, globally, it was an age for revolution. It was an age for asking for change. Because till then, there was this understanding that, you have the God and the king and all is well with the world, and if you do good, some good will come. By the 70s, people had realized that all that is complete bunkum. Of course, also an understanding of Marx at that point of time, and then demanding a classless society, and demanding some kind of resonance to the French, cries for independence, of equality, fraternity, and liberty. So it was most of this was these were youth movements which started in a very major way across the globe. So and then you had so many musicians who were right from your Beatles to Sinatra to you name it. They were so 60s and 70s. These were rebels in terms of their clothes, in terms of the what they smoked, and all of that. So it was a time of rebellion, so to say. And so he got chucked out of school. And then he went home to his mother in London and briefly tried trade journalism. Trade journalism is basically, it's about the movements and developments of the business world by articles and by writing articles and so on and so forth. So he tried his hand at trade journalism. So effectively, the one thing that he discovers is that he's a good writer. And then he takes up a job tutoring, and then he joins a touring company of junior actors, introduced him to the theatre, and then he becomes totally involved with the theatre, and he becomes a stage manager. And then he also takes to acting. And then he joins Anthony Creighton's provincial touring company, and Osborne tried his hand at writing plays, co-writing at first. So he starts co-writing with one of the playwriters, The Devil Inside Him, with his mentor Stella Linden, who then directed it at the Theatre Royal in Huddersfield in 1950. In June 1951, he married Pamela Lane. That is the story that we will hear in Look Back in Anger. And then his second play was Personal Enemy, which was written with Anthony Creighton again, with whom he later wrote Epitaph for George Dillon. That was staged at Royal Court in 1958. And then Personal Enemy was staged in regional theatres before he submitted Look Back in Anger. Now, his fame eventually came with the grand success of Look Back in Anger. Now, Look Back in Anger, the play that we are going to be doing, was written, he was a fast writer, and he was so agitated that he managed to write an entire play in 17 days flat. In a deck chair at Morecambe Pier, when Osborne was performing in Hugh Hastings' play Seagulls over Sorrento in Repertory Theatre. Osborne's play is largely autobiographical, based on his time living and arguing with Pamela Lane in cramped accommodation in Derby, while she cuckolded him with a local dentist. So he lived in a cramped room with his wife, and finally Pamela had enough of him, and Pamela started to have an affair with another dentist. It was submitted to several agents in London who rejected it. In his autobiography, Osborne writes, and I quote, The speed with which it had been returned was not surprising, but its aggressive dispatch did give me a kind of relief. It was like being grasped at the upper arm by a testy policeman and told to move on. So he actually makes fun of the fact that, such speedy dismissals he got. People were dismissing him at the drop of a hat, so to say. And finally, it was sent to the newly formed English stage company at London's Royal Court Theatre. Now, the English stage company is, the Royal Court Theatre was earlier known as the New Chelsea Theatre or the Belgravia Theatre. It was a non-commercial West End theatre in Sloane Square in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea in England. So that's where it goes. And formed by actor-manager and artistic director George Devine, the company had seen its first 3 productions flop, and they desperately needed a success if it had to survive. Devin was prepared to gamble on this play because he saw a powerful articulation of new post-war spirit. And Osborne was living on a houseboat on River Thames at the time with Creighton, eating stewed nettles from the riverbank. So keen was Devin to contact Osborne that he rowed out to the boat to tell him that he would like the play as the 4th production to enter the repertory. And the play was directed by Tony Richardson, starred Kenneth Hay and others. And finally, eventually it is the press which always comes up with these terms. So the term which we have always used for Amitabh Bachchan, the angry young man, the term was actually used at that point of time for the character, the seminal character who stares out at you from this very seminal play, Look Back in Anger. So he told Osborne that he disliked the play, and meanwhile there was somebody called George Fearon, a part-time press officer. He said that he didn't like the play and he was sure that it would bomb at the market. In 1993, a year before his death, Osborne wrote that the opening night was, and I quote, "an occasion I only partly remember, but certainly with more accuracy than those who subsequently claim to have been present, and if they were to be believed, would have filled the theatre several times over." Reviews were mixed. Most of the critics who attended the first night felt that it was a failure, but it looked as if the English stage company was going to go into liquidation. They wrote about the play, the Evening Standard. They said it was a failure and a self-pitying snivel. But the following Sunday, Kenneth Tynan of The Observer, the most influential critic of the day, praised it to the skies. And Kenneth Tynan wrote, "I could not love anyone who did not wish to see Look Back in Anger," he wrote. "It is the best young play of its decade." And then he also praised Osborne and says, "He's a writer of outstanding promise." And during the production, the married Osborne began a relationship with Mary Uble and would divorce his wife, Pamela Lane, to marry her in 1957. Later on, this play goes on to become an enormous commercial success, transferring to West End and Broadway, and eventually even touring to Moscow. And then eventually there is also a film that comes out of it. So the play turned Osborne from a struggling playwright into a wealthy and famous angry young man, and won him the Evening Standard Drama Award as the most promising playwright of 1956. So this play became the game changer for Osborne. From being a penniless, angry young man, he was suddenly transformed into a very sought-after playwright and quite a rich, probably not so angry young man. And then there is, of course, his autobiography and blah, blah, blah. I will not get into all of this. So he's written two remarkably frank volumes of autobiography, A Better Class of Person and almost a gentleman. A better class of person was also filmed by the Thames Television, and so about the autobiography, a noted critic, David Hare, says that it is, if you like, the final irony that John's governing love was for a country which is, to say the least, distrustful of those who seem to be both clever and passionate. There is in English public life an implicit assumption that the head and the heart are in some kind of opposition. If someone is clever, they get labeled cold. If they're emotional, they get called stupid. Nothing bewilders the English more than someone who exhibits great feeling and great intelligence. When, as in John's case, a person is abundant in both, the English response is to take in the washing and bolt the back door. So the English public, the upper classes had kind of rejected this play, but the play slowly started and it took on and it became a huge hit. And as David Hare says, that the English mostly don't like to have their feathers ruffled, but this play forced you to look inwards, look into the society and question where the society is going. So look back in Anger, the way it had come out in the Royal Court Theatre, and we've already talked about it and so on. So you can check out the first poster when it came out in 1957. Some of the characters who were there, particularly the lead male character, Jimmy Porter. Jimmy Porter became the first, he was associated with this term as the angry young man. And that's where the term was discovered and the term stayed with Jimmy Porter. So he was your quintessential angry young man. His wife, Alison Porter, then there is Cliff Lewis, there is Helena Charles, and then there is Colonel Redfern. And it had premiered in 1956 in Royal Court Theatre, London. And the subject was British class system, marriage, misogyny, and realism. These are the mainstays that we see in this particular play. And the setting is a single-room flat in English Midlands in 1950. You have to remember that already the Second World War has taken place. So, like I keep saying, 20th century was a traumatic century. 2 world wars had happened, completely demolishing any notion that anyone might have had about God, about goodness, about humanity, and such like. So every good quality, everything that one had been taught, had completely been decimated. It's as if it did not exist, because if you had even a shred of humanity, how could you have? How could how could the Nazis have existed? How could the Jewish camps have survived? How could an atom bomb be dropped? How could people across the world engage in terrifying wars and so on? So there were so many questions. Questions were all vis-a-vis the times. And another thing that post-war Britain was facing, there was huge economical crisis. You know that war depletes coffers. So if there is ever a war anywhere, any country, against any country, effectively what happens is the coffers are completely depleted. So the country goes through a terrifying economic downturn. And that's exactly what was happening in Britain. So people were jobless. There was this angry youth which did not have jobs, which did not have anything to look forward to, and many of them, as in the case of Jimmy Porter, these were intelligent people who, if they could have been employed properly, could have done something good for their lives, but they did not have that opportunity. So it was an anger directed at that. So we know it's a realist play. a play which is steeped in realism, which is depicting an everyday life, depicting the everyday life of a British commoner. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
So it's written by John Osborne, focusing on the life and the marital struggles of an intelligent and educated but disaffected young man of working class origin, Jimmy Porter. So we have to remember all of this, that Jimmy, coming from a working class, which means a salaried labor, especially in manual labor occupations and industrial work. Working class occupations include the blue collar jobs, as we understand it, some white collar jobs, and most pink collar jobs, as one would say. So members of the working class, in this case, the ones that we are talking about, are the absolute, the lowest rung of the society. These are educated but unemployed youth. We should not have any difficulty in figuring that. We have so many in our country all the time. So a lot of educated yet unemployed youth who somehow in our country they're not angry, but ideally they should be angry at the system, that they do not have jobs, they do not have something to, there's no sustenance. So this is an anger of the working class people who have people who work for a living or forced to work for a living, who are intelligent, but effectively life has treated them badly because the families are not moneyed. And then he's managed to get married to Alison, who belongs to the upper middle class. So the supporting characters are Cliff Lewis, he's a Welsh lodger who attempts to keep the peace, and Helena Charles, Alison's fairly snobbish friend. Now, Osborne drew inspiration from his personal life and failing marriage with Pamela Lane, which we already talked about. The play also gave rise to the term angry young man to describe Osborne and those of his generation, who employed the harshness of realism in the theatre in contrast with the more escapist theatre that characterized the previous generation. So we've already discussed this, that the previous generation, the kind of writing was fairly escapist. Here we are talking about the absolute reality. And the reality is also called the kitchen sink drama, because you see a lot of time Pamela is standing by the kitchen sink, Alison in this case, Alison Porter standing at the kitchen sink washing utensils. So effectively this drama was also called the kitchen sink drama. And the play we've talked about the receiving and all of that. So I'll again add to the brief summaries, which you have already delineated, but I will still add to it and discuss it. So Act 1 opens on a dismal April Sunday afternoon in Jimmy and Alison's cramped attic in the Midlands. Jimmy and Cliff are reading the Sunday papers, plus the Radical Weekly, price 9p, obtainable at any bookstall. As Jimmy snaps, claiming it from Cliff, this is a reference to the New Statesman, and in the context of the period would have instantly signaled the pair's political preference to the audience. Alison is attempting to do the week's ironing and is only half listening as Jimmy and Cliff engage in an expository dialogue. We know that their house is in, it's in Midlands, somewhere in central London. The important thing here is what Jimmy is reading. So he's reading a paper called New Statesman. It's a British political and cultural paper which was published in London, founded as a weekly review of politics and literature. It was connected then with the Sydney and Beatrice Webb and other leading members of the Socialist Fabian Society, similar to what George Bernard Shaw had Okay, so he's reading the New Statesman, and the very fact which newspaper you are reading, you can understand where they belong to. So belongs to the same political group of the Socialist Fabian group, where our good friend George Bernard Shaw used to be a member of. Bernard Shaw, of course, moved. He tried every party and he tried every ism, but at this point of time, his Jimmy Porter is very definitely more influenced by the Socialist Fabian society. And then you also can see that there is a huge social gulf between Jimmy and Alison. Her family is upper middle class, military, while Jimmy belongs to the working class. He had to fight hard against the family's disapproval to win her. And I quote from the text, Alison's mommy and I took one look at each other, and from then on, the age of chivalry was dead. So you also have dialogues like this, the dialogues are fairly misogynist. And while one may have a lot of problem with Osborne talking in this fairly misogynist manner, but Osborne's answer would be, well, if I see misogyny in the society, I cannot pretend that it does not exist. So also his language is very pithy, it doesn't spare anybody, it's very irreverent. So the way he talks about Alison's mother, the minute he talked to me and I knew that chivalry was dead. We also learned that the sole family income is derived from a sweet stall in a local market, an enterprise that is surely well beneath Jimmy's education, let alone Alison's station in life. So they earn out of a sweet shop, and Jimmy is way more educated to sit at a sweet shop, but he does it nevertheless. And Alison, is paying for falling in love with the quote-unquote wrong person. So as Act 1 progresses, Jimmy becomes more and more vituperative, transferring the contempt for Alison's family onto her. So his anger keeps mounting, he's constantly abusive, and now slowly the anger that he has against Alison's mom starts getting projected onto Alison. And he calls her names, he belittles. So some actors play this scene as though Jimmy thinks everything is just a joke, while others play it as though he's really associating her. So the tirade ends with physical horseplay, resulting in the iron boat overturning and Alison's arm getting burned. Jimmy exits to play his trumpet off stage, and Alison is left with Cliff, and she confides that she's pregnant. She's fallen pregnant accidentally. So we know that this is not going to get them anywhere. On the one hand, there is not enough money even to last for the two of them. On top of that, she's now fallen pregnant. And then Cliff urges her to tell him. When Jimmy returns, Alison announces that her actress friend, Helena Charles, is coming to stay. Jimmy despises Helena even more than Alison, and he flies into a complete rage. So throughout Act 1, what you see, and when you read the dialogues, you see that there is so much anger, there is so much, his pent up anger against the society, against the people, against Alison's parents, against the whole world. And all of that gets projected onto Alison. And it's extremely misogynist. Jimmy hardly does any work except for bad mouthing, screaming, shouting, and being angry. That seems to be his sole work. Whereas the house is being maintained entirely by the woman. She's ironing clothes, she's washing dishes. So this is the other thing that you cannot help. Though Alison's dialogues might be lesser, you have Alison on the stage constantly, and you see Alison constantly performing domestic tasks. And you see the man sitting and reading his newspaper, getting angry with the world and getting angry with everything around him. So that is the kind of thing that has built up. Now, couple of questions would arise. So is the playwright sympathetic to Jimmy's cause, or is he angry with Jimmy? Or is it just a depiction of what reality he sees? All that we will discuss after I finish discussing this. So hold on to the questions. Now, the next act, it opens on a Sunday afternoon with Helena and Alison making lunch. In a two-handed scene, Alison says that she decided to marry Jimmy because of her own minor rebellion against her upbringing and her admiration for Jimmy's campaigns against the dereliction of life in post-war England. She describes Jimmy to Helena as a knight in shining armor, and Helena says firmly, "You've got to fight him." So, again, something which is fairly well known to us, that in a moment of rebellion, in a moment of passion where she felt she needed to rebel against her class, she did that. She felt a great deal of affinity for the kind of causes that Jimmy was taking up, and she thought that was all very romantic and that was all very nice. And she came round and she fell in love with him. And till now, Helena can't seem to make up her mind whether she loves him or whether she does not love him. One part of her loves him, another part of her is constantly getting upset with the amount of work that is getting constantly piled on Helena. So Jimmy enters and the tirade continues. He continues to scream and shout. In his Act 1 material could be played as a joke. There is no doubt that the intentional viciousness of his attacks on Helena. When the women put on hats and declare that they were going to church, Jimmy's sense of betrayal peaks. When he leaves to take an urgent phone call, Helena announces that she has forced the issue, and she sent a telegram to Alison's parents, asking them to come and rescue her. And Alison is stunned but agrees that she will go. Now, Helena sees herself as some kind of a mascot for her old friend Alison. She comes and sees the chaos that is there in their house. She sees how much Jimmy is tormenting her, and she does what probably a friend would do. She calls up the parents and asks them to take her away. The next evening, you have Alison's father, Colonel Redfern, who comes to collect her and to take her back. The playwright allows the colonel to come across as a sympathetic character, albeit totally out of touch with the modern world. So the colonel, who has known, his time in this world is kind of over, as one would say, and he seems to have a romantic notion of Britain, which unfortunately does not hold true any further. So he does not come across as a despicable character. He comes across as a pleasant person, but his demeanor is that of a fuddy-duddy colonel, somebody who's lived his life and now it is, he really is not in touch with the reality. So, and then he himself admits, "You are hurt because everything has changed." And Alison tells him, "Jimmy's hurt because everything stayed the same." So it's also a generational thing that you see. Colonel Redfern can't make sense of the society because the society has undergone a change. Jimmy is angry because he feels the society is unchanged and the society is always against the working class. So there are two sets of people. Somewhere neither of them seems to gel in. The playwright now allows. Okay, just a sec. More people joining. So, and then Helena arrives to say goodbye, intending to leave very soon herself. And Alison is quite surprised that Helena is staying on for another day. But she leaves, giving Cliff a note for Jimmy. Cliff in turn hands it to Helena and leaves, and he says, "I hope he ramps it up your nostrils." So Cliff is somewhere he's suspicious of Helena's intentions. And then almost immediately Jimmy comes. His contempt at finding a goodbye note makes him turn on Helena again, warning her to keep out of his way until she leaves. And Helena tells him that Alison is expecting a baby, and Jimmy admits grudgingly that he's quite taken aback. But his tirade continues, and they almost come to physical blows. And then, as the Act 2 curtain falls, Jimmy and Helena are kissing passionately, and they are falling on the bed. So they start fighting. He starts ramming her. She starts fighting back. There's a physical altercation. They attack each other, and then something strange happens. They start kissing each other, and they fall on the bed together, and the audience knows what is going to happen. Act 3 is absolutely similar to Act 1. So it starts as a kind of a replay. It's a replay act. But this time with Helena at the ironing board wearing Jimmy's Act 1 red shirt. So the only change that has happened in this household is now you have, instead of Alison, it is Helena doing the tasks. Months have passed. Jimmy is notably more pleasant to Helena than he was to Alison in Act 1. She sometimes even laughs at his jokes, and the three of them, Cliff has also joined them, get into a music hall comedy routine that obviously is not improvised. So a music hall comedy is a kind of a theatrical entertainment that was prevalent in the Victorian era, and effectively it was a kind of a song and dance routine. In this case, it used to be a rehearsed song and dance, but here it is a unrehearsed song and dance that happens. So Cliff announces that he's decided to strike out on his own. As Jimmy leaves the room to get ready for a final night out for the three of them, he opens the door to find Alison looking like death. He snaps over his shoulder.
Look Back in Anger, brief summary. Look Back in Anger by John Osborne is a very successful play. The play revolves around a love triangle. Brief summary. Act 1. It is a dismal Sunday afternoon. The opening scene of the first act is set in the cramped attic of Jimmy and Alison in the Midlands. Jimmy and Cliff are sitting there. They are reading Sunday papers. They are also reading the Radical Weekly. Seeing an advertisement price 9p, obtainable at any bookstall, Jimmy takes the paper from Cliff. The ad refers to the new Statesman. Alison is busy doing ironing inside the house. While Jimmy and Cliff are involved in the expository dialogue, Alison half listens to them. The very first scene of the play reveals the fact that Jimmy and Alison are social apart. There is a huge gap. Alison is from upper middle class family. Jimmy comes from working class. It was very difficult for Jimmy to win Alison's hand in marriage. He had to face the disapproval of her family, but at last he won. It transpires that the family earns its livelihood from a sweet stall in the local market. The business is obviously below Jimmy's academic status. He is a highly educated person. As the first act progresses, it becomes obvious that Jimmy does not like Alison's family, but soon it transpires that he has also developed contempt against Alison. He calls her pusillanimous and he often insults her in front of Cliff. There is a heated argument between Jimmy and Alison. Cliff tries to pacify them and embraces Jimmy, but Jimmy protests. They begin to wrestle playfully and move towards the ironing board. There is also some physical horseplay. As a result, the ironing board is overturned and Alison's arm is burned. Jimmy leaves the stage and begins to play his trumpet off stage. There is an emotional scene between Alison and Cliff. She reveals that she has become pregnant accidentally. She says that she does not have courage to tell Jimmy. Cliff requests Alison to tell Jimmy about her pregnancy. After a while, Jimmy reappears. Alison informs him that her actress friend Helena Charles is visiting them and she will be staying with them. Jimmy does not like Helena. He hates her more than Alison. He gets furious and the conflict begins again. Act 2. It is another Sunday afternoon. Alison and Helena are busy cooking lunch. Alison gives a hint why she had chosen Jimmy. She tells Helena that when she decided to marry Jimmy he was campaigning against the dereliction of life of post-war England. She tells Helena that Jimmy was a knight in shining armor. Helena answers in a firm tone of voice that Alison has to fight Jimmy. When Jimmy enters, the tirade continues. After a while Helena and Alison put on their hats and announce that they are off to church. Jimmy feels upset and he senses betrayal. There is an urgent phone call. Jimmy attends the phone. Helena declares that she has forced the issue. It transpires that Helena has sent a telegram to Alison's parents and asked them to come there and rescue their daughter. Hearing that, Alison is stunned. However, she agrees that she will go. The scene changes and Alison's father, Colonel Redfern, appears. It transpires that her father has come there to take Alison back to her parents' home. Helena appears to say goodbye. She wants to leave soon, but Alison is surprised because Helena tells her that she is staying there for another day. However, she eventually leaves. Before leaving she gives a note to Cliff. It is for Jimmy. Cliff gives that note to Helena and leaves. Suddenly, Jimmy bursts in. When he sees the goodbye note he gets furious and begins to shout at Helena. He warns her to keep out of his way. Helena informs Jimmy that Alison is expecting a baby. Jimmy confesses that he is extremely shocked. He continues his tirade. There is physical tussle between Helena and Jimmy. When the second act ends, Jimmy and Helena are kissing one another very passionately. They fall on the bed. Act 3. Third act of the play is like the replay of the first act. Now Helena is ironing. She has Jimmy's red shirt on. Several months have passed. Jimmy seems to be more pleasant to Helena than he was to Alison in the first act of the play. When he tells her jokes, she actually laughs. Jimmy, Helena, and Cliff are happy. They get involved in a music hall comedy routine. Cliff tells them that he has decided to strike out on his own. It is the final night out for the three of them. Jimmy goes out of the room to get ready. When he opens the door, he finds Alison. She looks like death. He tells her that there are friends in the house to see her and he leaves. He does not pay attention to Alison. The scene changes at this point. Alison informs Helena that she had lost her baby. In the first act of the play Jimmy had cruelly told her that she would conceive a child and lose it. Helena and Alison reconcile. Helena now realizes that what she has done in Alison's absence is immoral. She decides to leave. She calls Jimmy and informs her that she is leaving. He gives her a sarcastic farewell. At the end of the play there is a highly sentimental reconciliation between Jimmy and Alison. They begin to play their old game which they used to play before. They pretend to be bears and squirrels. The peace prevails between them.